Why is company data enrichment so important in private equity? Most industries use company data in CRMs in order to qualify and to prioritize sales leads. They evaluate business opportunities based on size, revenue, or geography, and then support the sales teams in order to make a better decision. However, in the context of private equity, the CRM and company enrichment data goes way beyond that. Private equity funds rely on company data not just for classification, but for investment decision making. Let's take an example. Let's say that you work for a mid-market private equity fund that invests into primarily software and technology companies that are privately owned, that have an EBITDA somewhere between $10 and $30 million, and that have a low level of cyclicality, high level of recurring revenue, and primarily target B2B segment and have little exposure to consumer. If a deal doesn't meet one of these criteria, it will simply not pass through the investment committee. As a result, having the appropriate data enrichment and to be able to track each one of those data points in the CRM system is very, very important, as otherwise the deal team would just simply waste time on opportunities that are not worth it. And it's not just about deal flow. Company data information is also quite important for the purposes of investor relations. At the end of a given year, LPs will typically want some kind of a report that breaks down the volume of overall deal over a course of 12 months into respective geographies, segments, and size brackets. Without having accurate data in the CRM, producing a report is simply very, very hard. In terms of actually implementing this enrichment, the CRM is usually the central hub for all of the deal team data. That makes it a very natural point to add on other data sources. The process of adding these data sources is usually called company data enrichment or company data API integrations. The first step is to reach out to your company data provider and to get the so-called API key, which is a bit like a password that allows third-party software providers like a CRM platform to communicate, to authenticate, and to retrieve the data from the company database. After a new deal or a company is entered to the CRM platform will use that API key to go to the company dataset, retrieve the latest information, and ensure that the user is looking at the latest financials and the latest company description. This works not only for new objects, but also for the past data that has been created in the platform. Typically, a CRM system will do a so-called nightly batch job run or weekly batch job run. Will go through all of the historical information and do the same API call and ensure that the data that's reflected on the platform is also up to date. When entering a new deal, the CRM platform usually uses some kind of a search or so-called autocomplete endpoint that actually translates the string or the text value that is being inputted by the user, matches it against the possible outcomes, and presents that information back to the user, thus allowing them to actually select the right target business and make sure that no mistakes are made during data entry. Now that we've covered how API integrations work, the next step is actually selecting the right data vendor. Now, this will vary massively depending on which geography your fund is based in, which geographies your target companies are based in, and also the kind of investment strategy that you pursue. If you're operating in the US, you'll find that getting access to high-quality private company data is actually remarkably hard. Largely, this is driven by the fact that American companies aren't required to make public annual filings like their counterparts in the European Union or in the UK. Now, the most common data providers in the US are PitchBook, Grata, SourceScrub, and now increasingly GamePro. Each of these companies specializes in different aspects of company research and deal sourcing. However, they all help with the overall lack of transparency that historically has existed in the American market. Now, if you're in Europe, you have a lot more choices. Many of the European jurisdictions require private companies to make annual financial disclosures, as a result increasing the quality of overall data that is available. And this has led to a rise of what we call regional data providers. Just to name a few, in UK, there's companies like Burhurst. In the Nordics, companies like Value8 and GamePro, which is actually originally a Netherlands-based company, but has now become a kind of a pan-European data provider. Now, it's worth mentioning that there are also players like FactSet or CapIQ, which are frequently used to augment company research. They primarily used for comps or stock level performance indicators. However, they aren't very useful for the purposes of company data enrichment, simply because their coverage ratios among private equity-backed companies or privately owned assets is quite low. If you want a more deeper dive into how to compare these various vendors and their pros and cons, please check out the link that's included in the description of this video, which goes to a more comprehensive piece of research that we put together about a year ago. In our experience at ListAlpha, one of the biggest challenges with company data providers is that they all have certain gaps, whether it's gaps relating to certain industries or certain business sizes, certain geographies. their datasets are never fundamentally complete. One of the best ways to test that is to perform what we call a backtest analysis, which just simply implies taking the last 100 or 500 deals that have been entered for a given fund and checking every single one of those rows against the company dataset to see what kind of coverage ratio that data provider has against your investment strategy or sourcing strategy. And this is the kind of analysis that we've helped several of our customers perform in order to choose the most appropriate vendor. Now, these coverage gaps can be a very frustrating thing for the deal teams. Imagine you're looking to add a new transaction or a new deal, which is an add-on for your existing portfolio companies, but because the target is so small, the company data warehouse simply comes up blank, as if this company doesn't actually exist. Or alternatively, you could be taking a bunch of notes and referencing an M&A advisor with whom you're speaking to, but the M&A advisor is a boutique 10-person shop based out of Paris, and they're also not in a data set. This can be very frustrating and fundamentally results in people either being frustrated with the CRM experience or then having to compensate through manual data entry, thus wasting their time. At ListAlpha, we designed a CRM in order to eliminate this problem entirely. In fact, we actually created a bespoke company search and autocomplete endpoint or module that allows our users to find any company in the world simply by searching for it. No matter how small or how niche the target business is, you can always find it and reference it, whether mentioning it in a note or adding it as a new deal opportunity. And this is a great feature because it allows our users to interact and work with the platform in a far more intuitive and natural way without constantly switching back and forth different tabs and interrupting their workflow. Using our data sources, we're able to answer most of the firmographic type questions about a target business, such as HQ, number of size or staff, location and industry, some of the products that it offers, list of its competitors, and also the list of the senior management team. Now, sometimes customers want to go deeper and to actually get to the financial information that is only available in some of these third-party premium data sources. And in those cases, we actually integrate them into this view using third-party API integrations, just like I described earlier. We think that this approach is the best because it allows us to use ListAlpha only to provide a standard answer on any company in the world, and then to use ListAlpha plus APIs in order to go deeper on a smaller subset of opportunities. One major factor when choosing a company data provider is pricing, and it's not always very straightforward. The typical method in which they provide access to this data is usually through a so-called API charge, which means that you'll pay somewhere between $10,000 to $30,000 for a given set of credits that are allocated to your whole team to consume over a period of time. For example, you might get 10,000 credits per year, and every API call that you make to the endpoint will then draw down a set of credits. Now, this is a little bit confusing or counterintuitive because it doesn't mean that you necessarily get 10,000 companies you can download in a given year. For example, in order to get each one of the fields or each one of the data sets on a given company record, the data provider will actually charge you a separate charge for that call, meaning that in order to get a full comprehensive view of a target, you might end up calling somewhere between 2, 4, sometimes as high as 6 or 10 API endpoints in order to get the data together. Meaning that at the end of the year, 10,000 credits doesn't actually translate into 10,000 companies. It might end up being somewhere between 2,000 to 6,000 companies that you get. Some data providers offer more flexibility in this regard, and sometimes might not actually charge you for repeat calls on the same company, information for which you've already downloaded in the past, thus allowing you to stretch your credits a little bit further. Now, there's loads of small terms and conditions that are usually involved in these API credit arrangements. So it's very important to check the details of what you're subscribing to, because fundamentally it will impact your consumption, your budget, and overall cost for a given year.